Hello, everyone. This is Cody Lee of BlackCatBooks.org, author of I, the Dragon, Cruel and Beautiful Rabbit Hole Lore and Fray, and the upcoming Jaw of the Dragon. So, over the past week, I've finally gotten around to playing a little bit of Octopath Traveler 2. There have been so many games over the past month that I simply didn't have time to play it when it came out. I focused my time instead on Kirby Return to Dreamland Deluxe, which was fantastic. I love Kirby. So, Octopath Traveler 2 is an interesting game for a lot of reasons. For one thing, I loved the original. It's one of my favorite games on Switch, one of my favorite JRPGs on the console. I love that game. I put hours and hours into it. I did every storyline. I did a lot of stuff in Octopath. Right? Octopath was just fantastic. It really charmed me with its unique visual style, its presentation, its unique ideas, its concept, and especially its writing and its low fantasy setting. I found it very refreshing. I found it very unique. I found it very distinct. And even today, I look back on the experience of playing Octopath Traveler as like a momentous occasion, so much so that I even considered replaying the game, in spite of how brutally long and challenging it is. So it is. I love the original Octopath, right? So when Octopath Traveler 2 was announced, I found myself actually pretty skeptical, right? Octopath Traveler 2, it felt like it came out of nowhere. It felt like they were doing kind of the same thing again. It felt like a lot like I imagine people felt about games like Bravely Second or Bravely Default 2, in which Square Enix took an idea that had a lot of potential, that had a lot of good ideas behind it, and then just did the same thing again, right? With no real innovations, no real improvements, no real changes. And, I never actually played Bravely Default for this reason, because that series always had a bad reputation for this. But unfortunately, I think I know what people are talking about. Now that I've actually put like 5 hours into Octopath Traveler 2, I'm not even like 10 hours in yet. 5 hours, like a little over 5 hours. Haven't even met all 8 party members. I can safely say, without a doubt, that Octopath Traveler 2 is nowhere near the level of quality that the original game offered. The characters aren't as interesting, the writing isn't as good, the combat isn't as memorable, all of the additions and the changes don't really add very much to the experience. I found myself very frustrated seeing the wide range of ways in this game screwed up when it comes to its storytelling, when it comes to its boss design, when it comes to its level design and just general pacing. I find myself very, very frustrated with what the game does as a game. There are positive aspects to this. The visual quality is great. The graphics are as good as ever. Some of the characters have interesting backstories and designs and concepts to them, and there are elements to the story that are very, very interesting. But the way they all come together, the way they blend, even sometimes within like the very same chapters they're in, it just comes off as like very stilted and awkward. The reason I decided to rage quit the game out of like frustration was due to Partition's chapter one. Again, like I didn't do every single chapter. That's how frustrated I was with this game. I do not have all the characters yet. But I was doing Partition's run. I was learning about this character. I was learning about the world. I was learning about the setting, and I was getting really, really into it. Like to me, Partition felt like he could be considerably more interesting than Tressa was, right? Particio is like, a true capitalist in the sense. Like, rather than Tressa's story, which was like a kind of a coming of age, adventure about a girl who wanted to be a merchant, like Particcio's more about like overcoming poverty and like things like that. And, initially you get this really real sense that like this guy is going to have a really interesting fun narrative, right? You have this situation where you have he and his father are like building up this town Ores Rush, to like mine local silver. And so like they start this business, it becomes very, very successful, and then things start going south. And you kind of know it's going to happen. You kind of know it's going to happen, but you're like looking forward to it. You're anticipating it. Like, how exactly is this business model going to follow through? And what's the explanation for it? Oh, the landowner had a contract that he could buy the land back at any time. And I'm just like, first of all, they wouldn't have overlooked that in like the negotiation process, right? Like that's not something like a businessman of their skill level would have overlooked. But second of all, like that's not really something you can throw into a contract like that. That seems like complete. That seems like a load of crap. Especially since the antagonist of the chapter later goes on to admit that like yeah that wasn't in the original contract. We just made it up and we just screwed you out of this town for no reason. Like it feels like these people, they're highly successful, they're really good at business, and yet they get into this situation where their community falls into poverty for a brief period of time, really for no reason. It just feels extremely forced. And it clashes so hard with like what they're trying to do with these characters and the general world design and the ideas and the what they want to establish with these characters that like it almost feels like in a lot of ways that these lines, these individual like sequences were written by completely different people. And that's not the first time I felt this way. Like Oswald has this really weird chapter where this guy uh where Oswald and his guy, the guy he breaks out of prison with, I suppose his equivalent of like Red from Shawshank Redemption, like they break out of prison and like they're basically like 95% like out. They basically like have their escape plan ready. They're out of the prison. All they have to do is like cross the ocean, right? And so like Oswald comes up with a method of doing it, and for some inexplicable reason, the guy comes out, initially praises Oswald's plan, and then like turns right around and like shits on it for being ridiculous. Right now, I think the narrative explanation is that that guy was trying to sacrifice himself so Oswald could get away for reasons of his own. But it's it's so, again, it's forced. Like it doesn't make any sense. It's like the writing took a really, really harsh like hammer to the face where like the ideas are there, the general structure is there, the general idea of what they want to accomplish is there, but it doesn't have the execution that the original had. The original had like stellar voice acting, right? It had like a great localization. It had fantastic moments, great character building, great antagonists, and great side characters, right? That really made the world feel lived in and alive. And in this one, I don't think I found a single side character that I enjoy. Right? Well, maybe Throne, the guy who fights Throne. Maybe like some of the Throne people are interesting, but for me personally, like I just found myself frustrated with what they were doing with characters like the prison guy or Agnia's side characters, which are all incredibly boring. You have like the you have like the just the nothing burgers, that just keep propping up over and over and over again. Like the story just introduces characters and like has them play interesting roles, and then with the way things are going, it feels like they're going to do nothing with them. Right? Particio, I think, is a really good example of this, in which the antagonist, the guy who seems to be in the antagonist, Rogue, is like a business partner of you and your dad, right? Or Particio and his dad, and like he leaves the town under like weird circumstances, like really for no reason. He doesn't explain himself. He doesn't do anything, and you get this sense that like there's something going on with him, and you realize what's happening like at the end of the chapter, and it's such a weird like it's so tonally inconsistent with what they were going for early on, right? Like it turns out that like Roke was the landowner, right? So wait a minute, wait a minute. Even if this isn't true, this makes no sense because like it's stated that Roke and Dad, Pops, Pap, or I think I think his name is Pap actually, which is kind of ridiculous. Pops, they pooled their money together to buy the land. So Roke pooled his money to buy the land from himself, and then he used Pap to build up this mine, and then like he runs the mine into the ground. Why? Why exactly? It doesn't make any sense, and I'm not even sure that like the contract would fly, like legally speaking. That doesn't seem normal to me at all. Like it's so ridiculously exaggerated, especially if like the timeline is to believe. Like we're supposed to believe that like the town goes from like this highly prosperous, highly successful, this goes from this highly successful, highly prosperous area to like living in abject poverty in like less than like 8 years, right? Well, about 8 years, right? Uh, we're really like we're really supposed to believe that like everything is falling in disrepair, everything's going to shit. People are like starving in the streets. Like nobody's thought to do anything else with this town. Nobody's like trying to, you know, uh, say raise their own food. Nobody's trying to like maybe like start other business ventures. Like they mentioned like taxing silver. Like just like do something else, right? Like it feels like there should be plenty of ways out of this contract, even assuming it's legit, which I'm pressing really X really hard to doubt on this. Like it feels like this is like a Nick Rekieta style legal situation in which like it feels like completely hackneyed and it feels completely forced. Like it doesn't make any sense at all. And it's such a shame because Particio seemed like one of those characters that I was most interested in seeing because one of the things that like I thought Octopath Traveler 2 might be able to do well was like give different takes on these character archetypes, right? Octopath Traveler 2 looked like a rehash of the original. And in that sense, it might actually have been interesting to see like different versions of these characters. Like Agnia, I think, is a really good example of someone who's like, oh, she's completely different than Primrose, despite them both being dancers. Agnia seems to have like a loving family life and seems to be a perfectly normal, friendly girl, as opposed to Primrose and her edge lord ways. But like, the thing is. Primrose was interesting, like Primrose had like one of the most compelling storylines of any characters in the game. And like in the end, like you really go through this situation, like playing Primrose, where you're going on this quest for like vengeance with this really interesting JRPG protagonist, one of my favorite ever. And then in the end, you kind of had left with this realization that like, wow, maybe what Primrose was doing was never going to make her happy. And that is really good storytelling. That is what makes Octopath Traveler so spectacular. That's what makes it great. And in Octopath Traveler 2, I've never once felt that way. Like, never. Particio is the closest I've ever got. Like, Throne just seemed like, a rehash of Primrose's plot line, like, nowhere near as compelling or interesting. And everyone else just seems like they just don't know what to do with the concept. Oswald, like, what were they doing with that? Like, 2 chapters, the second of which is like a big nothing burger. It's just like the pacing is just all over the place. It makes no sense. Like none of the characters have like the charm or the creativity or the passion of the original, and that extends, I think, to like the gameplay as well. Like the gameplay is relatively unchanged from the original Octopath. I would say maybe the environments are a little bit better, but like when all is said and done, like the sprite work for the bosses is less interesting. The boss encounters themselves are worse. Characters just are just introduced and then like dropped. Uh, like, uh, uh, like characters don't have like the same kind of mystique or appeal they had in the original. Like I found myself getting very attached to like almost every character in the original Octopath. Maybe with the possible exception of Therian or Tressa, and that's mostly due to personal preference. Everyone, like, I still like them a lot. It's just like, when I compare it to like Honnet's like Shakespearean dialect and Ulbricht's like generic JRPG like plot line that's actually really well executed, or Primrose being like an absolute edgelord, like that means a lot to me. That means something spectacular, and I've I hate saying this, but Octopath Traveler 2 does not live up to that reputation. So much so that I have officially dropped the game. I have no interest in continuing it at this point. Like I'd much rather go back and play a new JRPG, or like one of the old ones that I need to get through. Dragon Quest V, for example. I keep bringing up how I want to play that game and I never actually do it. Dragon Quest Builders 2. Like I have so many other better games to play. Why would I ever waste my time with this stuff? So yeah, I have Fatal Frame 4 that I haven't even touched yet. That's not a JRPG, but I really want to play it. But um, I'm so disappointed, right? Like I felt like Octopath Traveler was one of the best games on Switch. I thought Triangle Strategy was a great follow up, and they give us this lazy second rate like rehash of a product. No, like I would have preferred it if they made something new. I'll come out and say it. I think Triangle Strategy is the superior alternative to this. I think Triangle Strategy much more is respects your time much more. I think Triangle Strategy really understands what what made the original Octopath great, while still like coming up with a new, unique, interesting setting and world and general gameplay mechanics. Like I think Triangle Strategy like is what an ideal sequel to Octopath should have been. In that, like the developers just radically rethink what they want to do, right? With the gameplay and with the characters and just the general design. Like Triangle Strategy, I think, is better than this. And it's such a shame. This is, I think, the worst game I've played so far this year, at least on Nintendo consoles. This is, I think, a massive disappointment, and I wonder how many other people, how many other fans feel the same way.